Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by learning to develop yourself, your skills, your network, and more. I'm Brian, your host. Are we over the AI fear-mongering yet? There was a period last year when everybody was talking about AI and how it was going to come take your developer job. There were articles about it. There were accounts on LinkedIn and Twitter that basically made careers of scaring people about AI. And then there was the whole prompt engineering phase when they said, just be a prompt engineer. That's going to be the job of the future, right? And I'd even speak to people that were interested in joining Parsity or just talking to people about coding in general. And they'd be like, well, I don't think I'm going to pursue that because, AI, right? It's going to just come take all the developer jobs. I mean, why wouldn't it? And it was hard for me to wrap my head around this because I was like, well, no, that's just not going to happen, right? That's just not what AI can do. AI is like statistics on steroids. It's not a sentient being. You get that, right? Right? I think a lot of people don't get that. I want to break down in a really, really basic and high level way how AI works, how large language models like ChatGPT work, why you probably shouldn't be using them if you're a new developer, the careers which are actually the most at risk, which is not software, spoiler alert, and why if you're using ChatGPT or large language models to construct code and think that's a viable career path, you are going to be in for quite a bad surprise. Now, I wanted to record this because I've just heard so much misinformation about AI and large language models out there, and I've seen people overuse and abuse ChatGPT in ways that are going to make them really expendable and hurt them in their developer career. At the same time, I use these tools and I love them. I think they're amazing. But at the same time, I strongly suggest you don't use them early on in your career. Why is that? Because you're missing the most important part of your learning journey as a developer. If all you're doing is asking ChatGPT how to solve a problem, like something you saw in Leet Code or HackerRank or Code Wars or something in your bootcamp program or some assignment you've been given, and all you want to do is get past the assignment. All you want to do is get the correct answer. So you dump it into ChatGPT, it gives you back something, you paste it in your code editor, and it works. And you're thinking, oh my God, this thing is like a godsend. Why would anybody pay a developer to do this when all you got to do is dump it in ChatGPT? If only it was that simple, my friend. I'm going to get into a lot more about the context and what software developers actually do, which is part writing code and part translating business requirements into code, and why those two things will never quite match up in the way that companies are trying to sell you on and people on Twitter or LinkedIn are trying to sell you on that these jobs could be automated or replaced by just having a series of AIs talking to each other in order to construct really complex code. I don't see that as the future. It hasn't happened yet. I think a lot of companies are trying to do it or wanted to do it and have kind of quietly given up. And I made an episode on this called Devon AI about the drama around that company and what they were trying to do with replacing developers and how that was essentially a charade, a fraud, and they got exposed. Check that out later if you want to as well. But before I dive into why I'm certain that AI is nowhere near replacing developers at all, let's actually go into how ChatGPT and LLMs work. LLM meaning large language models, and why the code that's produced from these is usually pretty basic. So ChatGPT is based on neural networks, these transformer architectures. I'm going to say some buzzwords here, but we're going to break these down a little bit. These models have multiple layers and they process text data and they learn the patterns within it. So you take an LLM like GPT-3, you train it on a big amount of text data, internet, books, articles, code you've provided on GitHub, which is all publicly available. This data gives the context and the knowledge, which allows the model to generate coherent and relevant responses. The text input is then broken down into smaller units called tokens, like words essentially. And each token is then converted into some numbers or a numerical representation. And it captures the basic meaning of the word through numbers. Then the transformer model, it'll use an attention mechanism. It'll look at the importance of each word or token and it'll say, oh, is this really important to this sentence or this series of tokens or is it not? And it will focus on the really important parts. For example, if I say a sentence like, I am maybe going to go to the store sometime today. The important parts might be like, I going store today. The rest of it might not be statistically relevant to the actual conversation or to that sentence. The model then gets trained on these tokens using a supervised learning approach where it basically predicts the next likely token in the sequence. Over time, it learns the patterns and structures of the language it's been trained on. It improves the ability to keep generating coherent text. It's like statistics on steroids, basically. It's like, you've given me a set of words, and I'm going to break these down into numbers. Now I'm going to look at these numbers, and based on this, I'm going to say, oh, you know what the next likely number in here, which I can translate to a word is? It's this. Based on the billions of pieces of text I've come across, this is the most likely next thing you are going to say, and I'll provide that back to you in a way that makes sense to you as a human that speaks English. So models like ChatGPT undergo a lot of fine-tuning, which means you can train them on specific data sets, which will enhance their performance. I actually have a small code challenge where I do this, where I look at a GPT model using OpenAI, and I fine-tune it to give me specific resume advice. And if you're interested in getting that, you can check it out at my GitHub or reach out directly and I'll just send it over to you. It's pretty cool. It's kind of fun. And it can really demystify some of what's going on with an OpenAI model like ChatGPT, which is using a large language model. So now that I've given you a lot of context and background on what ChatGPT and LLMs are doing, and essentially you can think of it, okay, I didn't really get all that transformer stuff. I'm not an expert on this stuff at all, by the way. This is just based on some of the basic research I've done. And I've always had an interest in data science going back about 10 years ago, which is one of the reasons I'm introducing data engineering and a Python course within Parsity that I really think you should check out. I can't wait to launch this one. I'm going to take this one because finally I get to learn all that data science and engineering that I wanted to, because what a lot of data science or machine learning boils down to is getting these massive training sets available in order to train these big models that can then produce code, text, language, content, whatever. But there's a huge part of this which relies on data, on good data. So what you feed into the model is what it will produce. If you have junk data going in, you'll have junk data going out. Imagine if ChatGPT and the models behind it were trained on 5-year-old essays or something like that, right? Like essays from 5th graders in Colorado. The model would probably only give you information that will be relevant to 5th graders in Colorado, right? So the better the data that you can give it, the better the output it will produce. Now, here's why AI-generated code is so basic. Now we understand that it's essentially just statistics on steroids, meaning you're going to get the most likely response out of there. So LLMs generate responses based on patterns learned from the training data. The model's designed to be general. It produces code that represents the average approach to solving a problem, which is why when you're using Copilot, if you're using Visual Studio Code, or if you're using ChatGPT, which around, I believe, 70% of developers or something are using AI on a daily basis, according to the recent survey by the State of JS. Really good survey. Check it out, by the way. It gives you some insight into what developers are doing in the JavaScript community. And you see that around 70% of developers are using this stuff, which is not terrible at face value. But if you're writing mission critical code, or if you need a novel solution, you need solutions that aren't just the average, right? And if you think about the average coder, are they the best? Are they the worst? Are they somewhere in between? There's a reason why when I was writing some code recently and I was using Copilot, it suggested to me using jQuery. And I was like, wait, what? Why is it giving me this jQuery code in here? This is terrible. Why would I be using that right now? Now, jQuery, not to dunk on them or anything. I mean, it's an amazing library that powers a ton of the internet. But I was writing code that didn't require it at all, but immediately it offered me some suggestions involving jQuery. And I was like, oh, that's right, because this is probably what the average developer has used. And this is what's likely represented on GitHub a ton. So the solutions you're going to get aren't optimized. They're not cutting edge. They're average. They're average at best. And if you're looking at this and you're thinking, this is great code, this is the code I want to aspire to be like, well, you're aspiring to be average. In some cases, average is more than fine. If you're writing a function that adds a few numbers, or if you're writing test cases for your code, this is a great tool to use. But if you're trying to figure out a really good solution, you probably don't want to use AI. Also, think about this: advanced techniques, niche libraries, specific domain knowledge. I was using a library at a really big company recently that was new. ChatGPT couldn't really give me any advice on what to do with it. Neither could Copilot. I had to just figure it out on my own, just like I'd done for years. Now, to me, that's not a big deal, but I have had mentees in the past that I was working with that got hired, and they had a ton of trouble coming up with solutions on their own because they had over-relied on ChatGPT and all these AI tools to basically offload that coding part to them. Now, when you're several years into your career and you're focused on bigger picture thinking, like trying to figure out, okay, how does this feature work with this other feature? How am I going to get a solution out really quickly as a proof of concept, perhaps? Then using these tools is A-okay, right? You're not worried so much about coming up with the perfect solution right now, or you're worried about other things besides just writing code. But if you had to, you could. Now, when you're at the beginning of your career and you're using this kind of thing, and you really need to learn how to write code because that's your main function at this point as a junior developer or even mid-level developer, maybe even as a senior developer, you're likely just pumping out a lot of code. And if you can't do that on your own and you're using an AI tool to do most of it for you, you're going to be in for a real bad surprise when there's a bug that gets found, it doesn't work quite the way you expect, and then someone asks you to explain it, and you have to say, well, my pet robot wrote it for me. And when that pet robot goes out, or you work at a company like I just did that bans AI, meaning you can't go to ChatGPT because it is blocked through a firewall, then you really might find yourself in a rough position. I believe there are a few really big companies that are doing this. I believe Amazon might be doing this as well because they don't want these models getting trained on their data. And lastly, the success of the code that's generated is usually evaluated based on syntactical correctness and functionality rather than the performance. What does that mean? It'll give you code that's pretty much correct and looks good, but not necessarily optimal because it is not optimized to give you optimal code, if that makes any sense. Now, here's the way bigger problem. You might be okay with producing average code. You might think, I don't care. Give me that average code. That's all I want. But that's just part of what software developers do. It's not uncommon, if you're even writing super trivial stuff, to work with multiple departments and people in different teams. For example, if somebody wanted to give you a document to change a few buttons on a page, you'd have to talk to the designer. You'd get a Figma file. You'd then potentially talk to a legal team, which says, this font is not ADA compliant. You might have to talk to your engineering manager and saying, hey, I now have to talk with these other teams to make sure that this button works with our component library. It's a little bit different. Do we really want to change it up? Because that might change all the buttons across all the other sites because they're all using this certain library, which we've created in-house. Can you imagine already how you're going to have to corral and wrangle up all these different teams to get them to agree on a certain way of doing things, or talk to multiple people in different departments, different time zones, online, that maybe not online, through email, through other sources? And this is not hyperbole. This is a very, very common scenario that almost all developers are going to go through at some point. And the big problem with using these LLMs is they have a limit to their interaction. They have a window that they can keep in memory that tells them all the context and all the different pieces of information that makes sense to the current conversation. Currently, that limit is 4,096 tokens. That's like 4,096 words per interaction, about roughly, right? That means it can only process a fixed amount of text at once. So if you have a really long conversation, it's just going to lose that context. Some of that context is going to be outside of the window, and it no longer makes sense to the conversation. And for most conversations, that can work well. Now, for software development, that does not work well at all, because you might have text in one file, you may have an email here, you may have code here, and you may have a back-end program here that depends on the front-end code working in a certain way. So that's a ton of context to keep in memory at one time, and they may be in different places. You can't just paste them all in the same place. Say, hey, here's code from the back end, here's code from the front end, here's an email I got, and also here's a Figma file, for example, like a mock-up. Here's like a PDF that shows you what this site should look like. I want you to take all that, and I want you to kind of just spit out something. And that something will involve maybe a library that I need to update. Maybe it'll involve a front end website that I need to update. Maybe it'll involve me getting more information so I can even move forward in the first place. It's just not built for that kind of thing. It's built for, hey, here's a function that's not working quite right. Help me out with that. Hey, write some tests for this component here. I'll paste that small component in here, and you can write me some JavaScript unit tests for that. Great for that kind of stuff. So hopefully I've kind of sold you on the idea that if you are a developer who can be replaced by ChatGPT or AI, you certainly will be, right? If you can be replaced by that, you will be. So if you're doing really, really basic stuff like maybe crafting emails using HTML templates or something like that, or making this most basic websites you could possibly imagine that are based on really, really simple Figma files, and you're just getting a file and you're like spitting out some HTML code, I could totally see those types of jobs getting replaced at some point. But even those, I feel like the back and forth, which you're going to have, as well as the ethical dilemma that developers often face when they're trying to make things compliant or they're working with a company and they have to be careful of legal language they're using or just have business context, it still may make it difficult for an AI to produce that kind of code. And also, even if it does, where's that code going to live? How is it going to be deployed? Meaning, how is it going to be offered to customers? Like, how's it going to go from the person's computer or the ChatGPT interface out to the web? I don't think anybody has done that yet. I haven't seen anything even close to that at this point. So even for these most basic of tasks, like the most basic of things, I don't see a mechanism where you can say, hey, GPT, how about you have now a GitHub account and we'll give you access to AWS or some cloud service provider and just let you have at it. I don't see that being a feature that anybody would feel comfortable doing. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that for a small boot camp like Parsity. Just personally, I would never want to do that. Not at this point. Maybe in the future, I never say never, but at this point, there's no way, even if it was available, because I don't want to give my personal access to something that I don't control, that's owned by another company. Their mistakes could be my mistakes, could be customers' mistakes, could be awful. Could you imagine the repercussions of doing something like that? So you have this statistics on steroid model here, which is awesome for doing these smaller tasks and doing trivial stuff, which you may just not want to spend your time doing. Doing anything beyond these trivial, single-focused tasks seems like it would be a disaster. So while we're all so worried about software developers getting their jobs snatched away by AI, I think we really should be focused on content creators. Now, I'm a content creator and a software developer, and I've seen a lot more infiltration of AI into content than I've nearly seen into software development. For example, Medium recently published a warning to all the content creators and authors on the platform. I've been writing for Medium for at least 7 years now. I've had a few viral articles. I love the platform. I love writing, and I love speaking about coding and making videos. I just love making coding and technical content and things that I hope will help people out on their journey like I've been helped. Anyway, they sent out a warning to all their authors out there and says, hey, look, if you're using AI generated content, we are going to kick you off this platform. We've noticed a significant increase in this stuff. It's farming engagement. It's basically people are making clickbaity titles, these really, really boring articles that have good titles. People are clicking on them and people are just pumping out this content nonstop because they can just have AI do it. I tried to have ChatGPT write me a newsletter article, and it was so boring. I'm like, there's no way I could use this. This would bore people to death. Not like I'm some great writer or anything like that. I've actually had a couple people complain about my newsletter, told me I didn't know what I was talking about. My writing sucked, and it was too long. A lot of people like it, though, so check it out. Go to parsity.io and sign up for the newsletter. I write all sorts of stuff on there. I try to keep it short, succinct, actionable, and give you hot takes and things that I normally wouldn't say on LinkedIn. Anyway, if you want to check it out, do so. If you don't, whatevs. But the problem is ChatGPT will spit out the most boring stuff, which we've gone over why that is, because it's the most generic stuff that you could write, right? It's going to give you statistically average stuff, right? So people are putting this average stuff on platforms like Medium, and then they're making a lot of money because they can just keep pumping out average content that readers click on. They're like, yeah, it's okay. Now you have enough people do that. You put out 100 articles a day, then that can add up to some decent money for some people. And for some people, that's worth it. Now, Medium is saying this is really diluting the content on here. We can't have this. We don't want people coming on here getting bored and jumping ship. And we also want people with real experiences they can talk about, because guess what humans want to hear about? Your personal experience. So if you're using ChatGPT to write comments on LinkedIn or create cover letters and things like that, I'm telling you, it's noticeable. I certainly notice it. The content is boring and no one wants to read it. So don't do that. But a lot of content creators are feeling themselves getting pushed out. How many thumbnails for YouTube videos have you seen that are AI generated at this point? Articles that are coming out. There are AI Twitter bots out there that are getting massive followings. And I've seen some people actually write about how they're doing this, or having faceless YouTube channels, which are AI generated content, which essentially will take content from bigger creators that actually make interesting stuff and just react to it, or just mix and match it up and actually make pretty viable, profitable channels doing this. This is a get rich quick scheme that I would never recommend. I also think there's some ethical dilemmas in doing things like this. Not to mention, this is just how you make boring content, which doesn't work in the long run. So I think that while we're all so focused on coders getting their jobs snatched away by AI, which is newsflash, just not happening yet. I'd like to see a single piece of evidence that this is happening. If you have one, I want you to email it to me. I cannot find a single piece of evidence that it's happening, but maybe you know something I don't or no one else has been able to find. If so, let us know, please. I hope this was somewhat helpful. I hope this makes you feel a little bit less nervous about the AI fear-mongering which is going on. I also hope if you are a content creator or thinking about getting into content, we need you. We need your voice. We need your personal experience out there. We don't need more AI-generated bland stuff going on. We want to hear about real people, what they're really going through. So, as always, hope that's helpful. Also, if you want that AI project using Node, Express, and OpenAI's API, just reach out and I'll send it over to you. I think it's a really fun project. And if you know a bit of JavaScript and you feel comfortable with backend a little bit, it's a great way to get started using AI in a project. See you around. That'll do it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. To learn more about becoming a software engineer with us, then check out Varsity.io. If you're not quite ready for that, then jump into our Dev30.xyz program, which is 30 days of working on your mindset, habits, and JavaScript skills. Totally worth it. See you next week.